Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to East Central Missouri and the world, and welcome to the James Strong Show podcast number 241. Thank you for joining us. Thank you for making us a part of your day. I appreciate it. This podcast was recorded on the morning of Saturday, October the 30th, from the James Strong Show studio in Western St. Charles County. A bit of a controversial podcast today. And I suspect the topic of today's podcast I know it will raise some eyebrows. It's a topic that you will not hear discussed on traditional media sources because of the cancel culture that we have now. And the topic concerns sex workers. It concerns people who have been allegedly sexually abused by others. It touches on homosexuality, bisexuality, etc., etc., etc. Things that are something other than the mainstream. Topics that you must have a certain mindset. You must have a certain opinion, stance, etc. on these topics. And if you don't, you're out, you're canceled, you're fired, you are ostracized, you will never work in the industry again. I'm going to touch on this subject. In fact, I'm going to go into great detail on this subject. Why? Two reasons. First and foremost, because I can. And I can do this, whereas others in the traditional media sources cannot. And in a way, I'm not going to blame them either, because the reason they don't is because if they did, they would be fired. And they've got bills to pay, they've got kids to raise, they've got mortgages to make, so I get it. So you will not get this type of commentary on a traditional media source just because of the way it is. I work for myself. I'm not going to fire myself. I'm not going to cancel myself. And also, I'm not going to say that my opinion is absolutely, positively the only way to be. I'm going to present facts, and then I'm going to go ahead and present my commentary, my opinion on those facts. I ask only that you listen. I ask only that you consider. And if you disagree, please send me an email. This is another thing you're not going to hear on any traditional media source, any traditional media show. If you disagree with what I have to say, send me an email. And I will have you as a guest on the show to tell me why you believe I'm mistaken for my views. Have I piqued your interest? I hope so. So, without further ado, let's get going. After I drink my coffee, hold on. I've been told by people I respect I can't talk about my coffee, but if I am going to sip on it though. But I will not tell you. I will not tell you that this is a Colombian roast, freshly ground, made just a half a pot this time. Black, no sugar or cream. I won't tell you that because people say they don't like for me to talk about that, so I won't. Okay, before we get into the topic today, I did have a couple of things I wanted to touch on. ABBA, remember them? If you remember being an ABBA fan, you're not a young person, okay? The fabled international Swedish pop stars, they're coming out with their first album since 1982. I didn't have any children. I didn't have any money. I wasn't married. I barely had a profession, okay? And that's the last time these people made an album. But on November 5th, the world will hear Voyage, the opening salvo to the mega return of the supergroup ABBA. But aside from the two men in ABBA, does anybody really care? I mean, even the two women in the group are only half-heartedly participating. They're not even doing any promotions. In fact, some say their arms were twisted to do this. Remember, these folks are in their 70s. some of them in their late 70s, so they're not young folks, okay? Now, the public seems even less interested, especially in their new music. Now, with all the legacy acts from the 70s, 80s, and 90s being very popular, the fans want to hear the hits. Their brains aren't wired to accept new music. And so ABBA has released 3 failed singles since September the 2nd. They're all duds. No offense. But here are the sales figures according to BuzzAngle Alpha Data, okay? One of their songs, their releases called Just a Notion, 3,000 copies were downloaded. That's it. And of the 3,000 that were downloaded, people only paid for 574 of them. Don't Shut Me Down, 5,800 downloads. I Still Have Faith in You, 4,300 downloads. Now, these numbers don't augur well for Voyage. That's the album's name. Although the album is currently listed as number 7 on Amazon-based advanced sales. But Voyage probably is going to have 1 or 2 big days on these sales as the superfans buy the album. And then probably will peter out quickly unless these aren't, because the tracks really aren't getting attention. Now, so far as radio goes, they've basically ignored ABBA's new songs. I mean, think about it. What's the station that promotes new hits from old groups? None. There just aren't any. So ABBA, again, arguably the most popular international pop group ever. Nobody cares about their new music. They just don't. In fact, their trophy wife and I have a goal, and our goal is to see as many of the older fading rock stars that we possibly can, rock stars, pop stars, before that ship has sailed. And I don't want to hear their new music. I want to hear their old music, okay? And I've said this before. And arguably the most popular group of all time, the Beatles. If somebody could reanimate George and John and pair them with Paul and Ringo, if those 4 hit the stage and announced, okay, we're going to play something from our new upcoming album, friends, they'd be booed off the stage. That's just how it works. Number 2, Prince Charles. Now, those of my British friends and I have a fairly big following, believe it or not, in the UK, quite a few downloads of the podcast in the UK. So please, my intent is not to belittle the royal family, just maybe belittle Prince Charles just a little bit in the way he runs his mouth and points his finger at me and you. According to the UK Express, Prince Charles is talking again about being green. He wants to be green. We need to do this. We need to do that. People need to sacrifice. People need to change the way they live, or the planet's going to go down the tube, blah, 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 blah. And actually, I think he's sincere. I think he means what he's saying. He's not 100% wrong. But here's just a piece of advice for HRS Charles. Maybe you should start being green by not living in an 820,000 square foot house. Okay? Yeah, that's right. Buckingham Palace is 829,000 square feet. It's just you and Camilla. Rent a 500 square foot flat. That would be very green, my friend. Think about it. Number 3, this was a story that it was almost, I saw this at the last minute. I thought, well, shoot, I don't want to put too many things in this dopey podcast where people will get brain overload. But I had to mention this because I think this is going to be in the news next week. It's according to the Miami Herald. And it has to do with a Cuban exile who told his sons that he trained Lee Harvey Oswald at a secret CIA camp. Now, stuff like this comes out every so often, every once in a while, but this one's a little different. About 40 years ago, after his death following a bar brawl in Key Biscayne, Ricardo Morales, known as Monkey, who was a contract CIA worker, an anti-Castro militant, a counterintelligence chief for Venezuela, an FBI informant, and a drug dealer, he returned to the spotlight Thursday morning when one of his sons made a startling claim on Spanish language radio. Now, Morales, who was a sniper instructor in the early 60s in secret camps where Cuban exiles and others trained to invade Cuba, realized in the hours after President JFK was assassinated in Dallas in 1963 that the accused killer, Lee Harvey Oswald, had been one of his sniper trainees. Now, Morales told his two sons 2 days before the assassination, his CIA handlers told him and his cleanup team to go to Dallas for a mission. But after the tragic events, they were ordered back to Miami without learning what the mission was all about. Now, the claims were made by Ricardo Morales Jr. during a show on Miami's radio station 1040 AM. Actualidad is the name of the radio station, or Actualidad Radio. That's Spanish for actually radio. And it tends to hold one of the long-held theories of the JFK assassination that Cuban exiles working with the CIA had been involved. Okay? And this story would have no legs except for the fact that earlier this week, President Joe Biden backed off on declassifying the remaining documents in the JFK case. They were due to be released, and Biden said, "Nah, we can't do this anymore." Of course, we know why he didn't. The reason he gave, COVID-19, which is the most bogus thing I've ever heard. But going on to the story, Morales' son, who's 58, said at the time his father took him and his brother to shooting practice in the Everglades a year before dying in 1982. And he told them he felt his end was near because he had revealed too much information about his work to the CIA to a Venezuelan journalist. The journalist was going to write a memoir, and he thought that he was going to be killed. And actually, he was shortly thereafter. Mr. Morales Jr. said, "My brother asked, who killed John F. Kennedy? And the answer was, I didn't do it, but I was in Dallas 2 days before waiting for orders. We were the cleaning crew just in case something bad had to be done. After the assassination, they did not have to do anything but return to Miami." That's what his son said on the radio show. Now, Morales Sr. also knew Oswald, or so claims Morales Jr. Quote, "When my old man was training in a CIA camp, he did not tell me where. He was helping to train snipers and other Cubans, Latin Americans. There were a few Americans. But when he saw a photo of Lee Harvey Oswald after the assassination, he realized this was the same character he had seen on the CIA training field. He saw him. He saw his name tag, but he didn't know him because he wasn't famous at that time. But later, my father sees him and realizes he's the same guy." Now, will this story have legs? I don't know. Is it a money grab? Maybe. Is it just a he said, she said? We'll find out. Please stay tuned. I think this story will have legs, and that's why I wanted to mention it to you, or mention it, report it on the podcast today. Okay, podcast today. Sex workers, Me Too, homosexuality, sexual abuse, etc., etc., etc. That's what we're going to talk about in a way that you haven't heard on traditional media sources. And there's going to be three people I'm going to talk about. Huma Abedin, yeah, that one, Hillary Clinton's confidant and assistant, I guess, and wife of what's his face, Anthony Weiner, the sex tape guy, the guy who sent pictures of his John Thomas to young girls, which, by the way, they're still married. Yeah, they're still married. Kyle Beach, the NHL player who claimed sexual abuse earlier this week, and Victoria Triece, a sex worker who's been kicked off of her son's school volunteer corps. Number one in the news, longtime Hillary Clinton aide Huma Abedin. She describes sexual assaults by a U.S. senator. Wow, that's a big story. When did this happen? A long time ago. Now, Abedin, along